I'm Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio. Today I wanted to do a video that's a little bit different than my normal quilting videos. As I mentioned before, I have a large quilting project going on right now, and I still have several hours of work to do on it, so I don't have a quilting video for this week. I want the customer to see her quilt before I post the video. So once I get it done and get it back to her, then I'll have some video on this project. In the meantime, as most quilters do, as most quilters work, I have more than one project going on. And right now I am piecing a quilt, and I am piecing it on one of my vintage sewing machines. Now this one isn't terribly old. It's I think a 1950s era sewing machine, but I wanted to show you the work that I am doing on it and just kind of give you a little feel for this machine and how it's working on this pattern that I'm doing. And then hopefully next week I'll have more video of quilting on the long arm, and we'll see how it goes. This is my Singer 239. This is a machine that was gifted to me from an estate of a lady that attended our church, and she worked with me quite a bit in the church. Work as a church secretary, and she would come in and volunteer and help me in the office. And when she passed away, she had 4 or 5 sewing machines in her home, and I purchased one, and at the end of settling her estate there were still 4 machines left, and the people who were settling the estate asked me if I would just come and take those machines and do whatever I wanted to with them. So this is one that I have been using. This is a 239, and this is a Fashion Mate machine. It does have reverse, and it has the stitch length regulator here, but there's no zigzag, so it's a straight machine only, straight stitch machine only. But it works really well. It has the markings here for the different widths, and I have a 1/4 inch foot here. This is a new foot that I purchased, and it was in really good shape. I did clean it up and purchased some new bobbins for it. I think the only thing I had to really do was buy a new spool pin for it, but other than that, it's been working well. It's belt driven with electric motor, and it has a floor pedal. And the cabinet I have it in is a vintage cabinet. I really don't know how old this is. My mother-in-law gave this to me, and she said it was her mother's, and it had been sitting in the barn for years and years and years. So I brought this home, and it's been cleaned up, and it needs to be refinished, but in the meantime I've got this machine in it, and I'm using it as it is. But the finish does need to be redone, and it needs some glue in some of the pieces where the pieces come together to kind of tighten those up. So when I sew on it, the cabinet wobbles a little bit, but I think that'll all go away once my husband and I get this cabinet put together correctly. Once we get it all glued and any extra screws it might need, then we'll be ready to go. And my husband does enjoy helping me work on these machines, so I don't have any problem there with collecting vintage machines. And this gift of these machines started us into collecting vintage machines, so I do have several, and I like taking turns working on each one. So I'm going to show you some of the piecing that I've been doing on this machine. I'm doing a Hummingbird quilt. The block is called Hummingbird, or it might be called Periwinkle. I got this idea from a video from Missouri Star Quilt Company, and right here I just finished piecing a couple of the blocks. There's 2 pieces here that when they're put together they will make a full block, and I'm doing a kind of assembly line piecing and just running them through and then putting them together. But I do have some video that I'm going to show you of completing a couple of these blocks on this machine. So I hope you enjoyed it. The name of the block that I am piecing here is called a Periwinkle block, or you will sometimes see it as a Hummingbird block. Now this is a large version of this block. It's usually smaller than this when you see it in vintage quilts.
And if you're interested in getting this pattern, I would suggest going to Missouri Star Quilt Company's YouTube channel and looking up Periwinkle Quilt. And there are a couple videos on how to sew this block together. It is a paper piece block, and they do sell the papers that go with this, as well as the template that you can use to cut out that kite shape that's there in the center. Now when you get these sections done, you need 4 of the sections to make a block, and then these blocks, the way I'm going to set them together is just in a straight set, just side by side, and that'll give me a lot of negative space to do some long arm quilting in there. So this is a long-term project for me. This isn't anything that I'm working on to get done real quick. It's something that I'm doing in between. Well, actually, while I am doing long arm quilting, I will quilt for a couple hours on the long arm machine, and then my back gets tired and starts aching, so then I'll go sit down and I'll do some piecing. So that's kind of how my routine is for quilting. Now the machine, when I looked up the serial number on the Singer website, the information said that it was built between 1934 and 1950, and it was made in France. Now the 239 is called a fashion mate, and as I mentioned before, it's just a straight stitch machine. There's no zigzag, but it does have a reverse feature, and some of the vintage machines do not have the reverse. Now the needle is one that you thread from left to right. Some vintage machines that you thread them from right to left. So when I'm switching between my machines, I have to look closely at the needle and the way it's positioned in the machine. I look for the scarf of the needle, which is that little curved cutout in the back of the needle, and that tells me which way to thread the needle. It also uses a size 15 bobbin, which is a very common size, and you can buy replacement bobbins very easily in the stores these days. And I did buy some extras because several of my machines use this size 15 bobbin, so that way I have several for each machine and don't have to go digging around from one machine to the other to find bobbins. So the shank is a short shank, and I am using my piecing, my 1/4-inch piecing foot on this. That is a new foot. It is not a vintage foot, and I just like the accuracy that it gives me. And as we all know, the more accurate our piecing is, the better result we get from our finished quilt top. So this machine, when I purchased it, it just needed to be cleaned up, and I replaced the spool pin in it and oiled it, and it's been working fine. The tension on the bobbin is really good. I didn't have to mess with that hardly at all, just give it a little bit of a tweak, but other than that, it works really well. And the cabinet, I keep a spreadsheet on my computer since I have so many of these vintage machines, and helps me keep track of what each one does. The cabinet, I also wrote down what I had, the information I had on this cabinet, and it was my mother-in-law's grandmother's cabinet. And my mother-in-law inherited it, and she had put it in the barn at her house, and I'm not sure how long it was in there, but it was there for probably over 20 years as far as I know, probably even longer than that. And when she gave it to me, I was going to put my modern machine in it, but my modern machine didn't fit, so I had been using it as a table. And when I got these vintage machines, I was able to fit this one in the cabinet pretty easily. So that is going to be refinished once the weather gets a little bit warmer, and we can take it outside and work on it and sand it down and restain it and put a varnish on it and tighten up the joints. We have a joint in there that's loose, and we're going to glue it and clamp it and see if that'll tighten it up and and then put the machine back in it and use it. At the moment I have 4 cabinets that are all sitting together, 4 different machines, and I'm enjoying playing around with each one of them. And eventually I'll have probably a quilt made off of each one of those machines. So the quilt block, the pattern is, there are going to be 60 blocks in this quilt, and I'm just taking my time with them, as I mentioned before, doing the piecing intermixed with long arm quilting, and probably next week I should have more long arm video for you, and we'll see how it goes this week with work and quilting, and see how much I can get done. But I estimate I have probably 3 to 4 more hours on the quilt that I'm working on, and once I get it to the customer, I'll have some video to show you on that. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and thanks for watching.